Money is very mystical, this concept that energy becomes a quantitative stock of worth, and that stock can be exchanged for resources and supplies, land and labor, overall what is termed as wealth. Now, wealth and money are not exactly the same. Money is more the measurement of the value of energy. Wealth is the abundance of some of the things that is purchasable with money. Money can also purchase other nebulous concepts, not always tied to the idea of wealth, like loyalty, respect, self-worth, social standing, fame. Indeed, most of the non-physical resources money affords comes simply through possessing large amounts of this stock. You reach status levels within a social hierarchy. So where does money come from? As I said, it's very mystical. If we trace its origins, we'll come to early agricultural civilizations whose rulers were divine leaders, these sacred kings. The most basic explanation for why kings and leaders exist in a social structure is that the ones who prove themselves to be the most capable at safeguarding the future, at discerning the ebb and flow of energy within their community, that is who your leaders and kings will be. Further back in more tribal and nomadic communities, this was the shaman, and using this as a basket term for a sort of class or archetype of human, in the way that we might say warrior, which would mean wildly different things to different cultures and different time periods. It simply denotes a kind of role that was needed and then fulfilled by a particular individual or group. For the case of the shaman, this role is the invisible, the unaccountable, that which couldn't necessarily or predictably be dealt with through ingenuity, skill, routine, or practice. Life will throw diseases, famine, war, cataclysm, injury, even disputes and arguments with fellow members, putting everyone's survival and happiness at risk. It's the drama of living. Who gets to decide what the price for a crime is when no one can agree? What happens when everyone gets sick? Do we take the path around the river or through the forest? Do we wage war or offer peace? The course of action when there is no easy outcome or no unanimous decision, that is what the shaman and what a leader would ultimately fulfill the role of. So what emerges is a guide, a chieftain, an elder, a war hero, a great hunter, someone who has proven that they can find the optimal outcome and is consequently respected and trusted by the tribe. This person becomes the neutral arbitrator and decision maker, someone detached enough from community life but whose entire existence is dedicated to that community. And this is the role that the shaman would fulfill. It happens to be that the things we can't predict, or that we know can happen at any point that scare us, we become superstitious of. These forces are unseen. Bad luck, sickness, failure, weakness, wounds, hunger, thirst. Now, since these unseen forces are more or less concepts of bad happenings, those concepts and the elements that carry them are often given personification, spirit. They are animated. So the shaman deals with those forces, but with the knowledge that those forces are within and around everything. All the seen and predicted and known elements, they harbor these unpredictable consequences. In terms of energy, the leader is the regulator of the system. When one part dysregulates, the leader will mediate. The factor of human language, imagination, history, and culture do not change this basic principle of regulation. An individual, a family, a clan, an empire, they are all subject to this as it deals with energy moving, and disruptions and balancing happen regardless of the type of system. Whether it's a nervous system, a river system, an ecosystem, a political system, a weather system, a solar system. Energy takes many forms and distributes and transforms from one system to another. Whether we speak of religion, traditions, science, laws, etiquette, morals, they are all about this communal sense of regulation. So the shaman does this, however it occurs in a particular tribe, tradition, culture, or land. The trend in history is self-induced and mastery of seizures, the total regulation and dysregulation of one's own system. Not that there will ever be a perfect instance, but if a community is seen as all its members in a boundary, the shaman is the one that is moved out of that fence, who can see things as a whole, get the bigger picture. Now, where that shaman positions themselves, either in the back to guide, teach, and support, or the front to rule, own, and possess, is where you get the difference between someone like a tyrant or a cult leader and a hero or a saint. Within that boundary is laws. These laws will form broad biological commonalities, factors that are part of living, the demands of the environment. And the laws will organically grow as well as routines develop, and the neurosis that may also grow as a result of doing things the way everyone has as far back as anyone can remember. And finally, what the leader might command or suggest, what laws they may decree. Morality is a subset of all these factors and often dictates many aspects of the law. But these terms, law, morality, rules, cultural traditions, these are in summation describing guilt. And guilt is the cause and effect that leads to dysregulation, whether imaginary or conditioned. Guilt is the change or transfer of energy. This will be important for later. For now, it is guilt that attracts or repels these unseen factors, and those unseen factors are microorganisms, the animating force behind those concepts of disease, bad luck, war, cataclysm, famine, and ruin, as well as their positive counterparts. Now we can return to the origins of money. Upon establishing agriculture and with ever-growing settlements, the leaders who at first were this in-between role, these shaman kings, whose abilities of reading the superstitious forces of guilt mixed with the demand for a central organizing leader, a governmental role. Written language was a byproduct of keeping inventory, recording exchanges, a ledger of resource distribution. Language was a divine thing because the leader was divine, and the law was divine because it told them how to avoid the consequences of guilt. The gods gave to the seizure shaman kings the first written language, and from which the common language would derive and evolve from. Laws formed because resources were measured, transactions put in stone or scroll. The guilt needed to be known so that it could be shared and distributed equally through merit and skill and worth, at least in theory, to the entire population. Consequences were codified based on the supposed level of guilt. And here we have the introduction of money. If everything was based around guilt, and the regulation of the system, literally the transfer of energy, why not keep track of the guilt? Quantify it. The guilt of labor rewards X amount of money. Because guilt is an energy regulation matter, and the consequence of guilt was microbial, the money should therefore contain microbial properties. So we have beer as one of the first forms of money, a probiotic in those times. Or you might be paid in salt, a preservative. Or what would come to be the standard and most valuable, precious metals, copper, silver, gold. These are antimicrobial metals. They are rust resistant. These metals conduct electricity to ground energy. That allowed for the accumulation of guilt without as much risk. Assuming you made use of those materials, wore them as jewelry, turned them to dining utensils and kitchenwares, water vessels, and decorations around the house. Storing and hoarding them would of course do little for you. Now, such a powerful tool, this mystic ability to transfer guilt, to buy people's guilt, to pay off guilt. Here, money became tied to status. Nothing you can't buy, nothing that doesn't have its price. People with money are said to be lucky, fortunate, even blessed by gods. To lose money is a curse, to misuse it, a tragedy, one that will see you scorned more than the wealthiest hoarder. Such a valuable form of energy was too risky to leave in your own home, in your purse. The solution for your salt was a proxy, to use the imagination, write it down as a paper or minted coin of an invaluable material. You bank it with the empire, a guild or a company. You use the form of bills, checks, cash. In other words, guilt-approved transaction notes. It's a game of pretend. You pretend to move that amount of gold when buying or selling. You move all the guilt around without the regulation anymore, without the probiotic. So let us recap. Laws are regulatory enforcements. The energy of a system must flow in these lines to maintain whatever proper idea of order is decided upon. You can't steal, you can't hurt people, obey traffic laws, property laws, administrative laws, substance laws, food laws, work laws, safety laws, education laws, health laws, environmental laws. Because these lines are imaginary, developing out of a complex host of factors and tradition, pretense and arbitration, two things happen at once. There is a dysregulation as you step out of the energy pathways, and the burden of guilt is then also shifted to you, a scapegoat. One of the most painful experiences as a social species is to be outcast, to be ostracized, labeled a leper. Because the guilt gets shifted to the least capable of maintaining law, upholding the guilt that prevents the unaccountable, those unseen forces. It doesn't matter that a law and its consequences are arbitrary and may even target specific demographics. The guilt placed on someone who can conceptualize that others are pointing a finger of blame is enough to dysregulate their system. They internalize it. A criminal is a criminal. You're a bad person for breaking the law, even if you know the law is meant to hurt you. That is by design. Society needs people to uphold the guilt, no matter the status of money being made. Even among the poor, the lack of laboring for money is guilty. Bad things will happen to the community. Dysregulation ensues. You have to participate to share the burden of guilt, no matter how small the slice. And now we've made it to the most interesting part. Lawyers. After shamans and shaman kings and then sacred kings, human settlements began to be ruled by just kings, then later monarchs, emperors and tsars and khans, dictators and parliaments and presidents. The point is the leadership duties were divided. No longer did the central regulator or the regulating court serve to factor the unaccountable, those unseen forces, the shifts and currents of the changing microbial tides. They handled the administrative now, the bureaucratic part, the part that dealt with laws and the imaginary token of energy. Aristocrats whose position of power depended on their money, not their ability to guide and regulate the guilt. So the job of the shaman king was divided in two, what we just talked about, the court and then the court wizard, the sorcerer. No ruler dared foregoing a priest or a seer, an oracle or sorcerer of some variety to at least counsel them on the signs and symptoms of the unseen, to find the right path, to gauge the good and bad luck that changes at every turn and that can turn on a dime, to alleviate the guilt. And history will tell of all sorts of power play, friendship, betrayal, incompetence, ignorance, intrigue, and success imaginable between the lot and the caster of lots. Navigating this rise and fall of empires the world has always witnessed, this regulation of the land and people, the movement of energy, of guilt, and that guilt token known as money. If you could study the guilt, the inconsistent causality it takes, the luck and lot in life, the laws we build to condition an ease of travel between the gaps where we think no unseen forces are present, where we can avoid microbes and therefore illness and dysregulation, to keep everyone afloat even if it's on the backs of the guilty. And what does that make everyone aboard the ship? Guilty, you'd think. True, if not for those sorcerers, the lawyers, the jurors of law. We use credit to replace gold and law as regulation, the most superstitious form of trying to read energy. Law. Evil doesn't exist. Only the law can punish you. Lady Justice is blind. You can tip the scales as much as you want if you can do so legally. She won't notice. She's blind, but not deaf. Lawyers can talk and spellcast their way through the laws, rules, guilt paths, the regulations, and navigates them. If you can logically create doorways and portals and loopholes through the dysregulation of a system to avoid the guilt, you can hoard that money, that energy proxy. People that break the law deal with the collective consequences of guilt accumulated by a society. If your wizard can prove in a court of law with the right words and evidence that you were not guilty, then declared for all to hear you are not guilty. Now, if that weighs on your consciousness, that you believe what you did was wrong, well, that's not so bad. That's easy to justify. It's your peers, the people of higher guilt status and sometimes lower guilt status, your image, your legacy. That's the part that really dysregulates a person. It's what other people think of us that really matter. And it's what we think other people think of us that move us to seek alleviation from the guilt, to regulate the dysregulation. People stick in groups. The wealthy stick together. Social groups organize themselves. Everyone falls into their class and rank and belief, usually bought and paid for by money. This is to help regulate the guilt. If one person learns to make money doing a new thing, everyone around will despise that person at first. But the more people who make money that same way begins to normalize that method of guilt, and so it no longer has the same dysregulating effect. People need other people to be like them so they can feel better about themselves, and vice versa. To belong. That's the real social contract. To belong so we don't feel guilty. With every check you notarize, your notoriety increases. But in all this, the problem remains the unseen forces. You can game the system, game your tribe, game the law, but you can't game the game masters. Money without a probiotic is disease. Disease without money becomes the scapegoat. The guilty fingers point from the top down. That's the prize money buys you. You get to shift the blame. And lawyers, sorcerers of the year, whatever that is, they are who you pay to transfer the dysregulation of energy using that mystical form of guilt called money.